China has seen a meteoric rise from a destitute agrarian society based on communist communes to a country seemingly overflowing with prosperity. But the glittery skyscrapers hide a dark secret. Welcome to China Uncensored, I'm Chris Chappell. The Chinese Communist Party is a grim, authoritarian regime that's built the world's most advanced surveillance state and is seeking to export that model around the world. But rather than recognizing it as a threat, Western business leaders and economists became China's champions. For years, we've heard about the Chinese economic miracle. The Chinese communist system was just better than the fractured, chaotic American model. The US can't even build high-speed trains. That's why China will eventually overtake the US, becoming the world's largest economy. Some were predicting that would happen as early as 2024. In other words, in just a few months. Doesn't look like that's an accurate prediction now, does it? If you haven't been watching, the Chinese economy is spiraling out of control. The real estate market is collapsing, and that makes up 30% of China's GDP. Exports are falling as foreign companies move production elsewhere. And youth unemployment is so high that the government literally just stopped reporting it. This is the end of China's economic miracle. Of course, the whole idea of it ever being a miracle is a lie. And I'll tell you why in just a moment. But Bloomberg Economics is now reporting that China will never surpass the US. That's a pretty big change, since these were the same people who thought China would permanently surpass the US as early as the 2030s. The reason the Bloomberg economists gave was the post-COVID rebound has run out of steam, reflecting a deepening property slump and fading confidence in Beijing's management of the economy. Imagine communist control of a state-run economy didn't work out in the end. Who could have guessed? If only we had a century of failed communist states to go by. Here's how the outlook has changed. The original Bloomberg predictions had China's economy growing 4.3% in 2030, down to 1.6% by 2050. Now, the forecast is 3.5% by 2030, down to less than 1% by 2050. I know those don't sound like earth-shattering numbers, but they are incredibly significant. Not only will that affect China's plans to modernize and expand its military, it also fundamentally challenges the CCP's grip on power. The problem is, many countries were duped by the imaginary Chinese economic miracle. And now the world is dangerously dependent on an authoritarian communist regime. Bloomberg put together this graphic based on IMF data. The pink countries are the ones that have China as their top export destination. So why was the economic miracle a lie? And if China's economy goes down, will it take the world with it? I'll tell you more after this quick commercial break. Welcome back. So it should be good news that an evil, expansionist communist regime will not be the world's biggest economy. The problem is the entire world depends on China. Right now, China's economic slowdown isn't having too much of a global effect. As the Washington Post says, China is not an important enough customer of goods produced elsewhere for its woes to be contagious. They give the example of Odysee Worldwide, an American elevator company. China is a huge market for them, but as the real estate market implodes, China doesn't need as many elevators. That's definitely bad news for Odysee. Last year, China made up about a third of orders. But the elevators that Odysee sells in China are made there. In other words, it's their Chinese factories that will feel the pain, not all their American factories. That's why the current economic slowdown is having a limited global effect. But if this continues, that's when problems will start. The first to be hit will be major commodity producers. I'm talking about oil from Saudi Arabia and Russia, copper from Peru and Australia, soybeans from Brazil. China's neighbors will also take a big hit. Taiwan, Japan, South Korea produce a lot of high technology, but the individual components are assembled in Chinese factories. Then there's the multinational corporations that were dumb enough to put everything in China. Almost a third of BMW's income comes from China. Intel, too. Communist policies aren't helping these Western companies either. U.S. Commerce Secretary Raimondo says U.S. businesses are saying China is becoming uninvestable. Many Western businesses are being raided and fined by authorities under China's new anti-espionage law, because the best way to make money is to steal it from others. That's Communism 101. And that's exactly why the so-called Chinese economic miracle was a big fat lie. All throughout the history of the Chinese Communist Party, the groups that had money were targeted and their wealth stripped away. Except for communist officials. They got to keep their ill-gotten wealth. The party targeted intellectuals, rightists, counter-revolutionaries. In modern times, it was Falun Gong practitioners, 100 million people who were a huge chunk of China's middle class. But it wasn't just Chinese people the Communist Party stole from. According to the FBI, Chinese IP theft costs the U.S. economy up to $600 billion a year. But it turns out stealing from the most productive people is not a long-term recipe for success. China's economic miracle was a lie, and now people are starting to pay the price for believing it. But don't worry, there are some who still haven't clued in yet. I guess some people have a death drive, which I actually have a video about that I want to show you. But first, this show depends on support from viewers like you on patreon.com/China Uncensored. They're the fans I call the China Uncensored 50 Cent Army, and as a thank you to them, I answer their questions. Today's comes from a person who opposes the CCP. Dear Chris, what is to stop Taiwan from simply refusing to sell advanced semiconductors to mainland China? Given that the CCP keeps threatening them, wouldn't it be worth the economic threat Taiwan would take to eliminate the threat? First of all, I like your screen name. Secondly, you're absolutely right. Taiwan's biggest semiconductor maker does big business with China, which, as you say, is kind of weird since China is very open about using that technology to conquer Taiwan. This is a problem throughout Taiwan. China is the country's biggest trading partner. They are in bed with their biggest enemy. It's crazy how people will act against their own interests for money. And people will pay the price if they continue to support the Chinese regime, because as I talked about today, it's going down. I can't say when, but it will happen. And the CCP will drag down anyone it can with it. But as I said, I guess some people just have a death drive, something you can learn a lot about from Kirby. Check out this video from our new channel, Gamers Unbeaten, and click that orange button to support us on Patreon. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.